Hello, everyone. This is Matt, your chaotic and writer, and thank you very much for tuning in to this World Building Wednesday stream. Except two things. First, this stream didn't actually take place on Wednesday. It took place on Thursday. Two, you're not actually watching the stream. You're watching the video I took after the stream. Why am I taking this video? It is because I wanted to take a moment to thank you, my patrons, for supporting me through the past couple of months. It has been a very productive and very insightful experience developing this thing that is Chaotic and Writer, figuring out what sort of new content I want to roll out. And you have been there supporting me, not just with dollars and cents, but with your just general patronage, with your interest in the content I'm making, with your favor of all of this. So I just want to thank you. It does a lot for me, and it helps, motivate me to continue doing this. And it does also cover some of the expenses of the overhead of like having a website and having certain services to help support the stream content, like the Dungeons and Dragons content and World Building Wednesday content and things of that nature. So you are about to watch a World Building Wednesday stream based upon 20 plot types. I literally did 24 hours of reading and research on this, and then put together a presentation for it. Yeah, you will notice that there's some irregular editing. This is intentional. There were certain pieces that I felt didn't necessarily needed to be in the final edit, and frankly trying to remove some of the more awkward takes when possible. Boy, howdy, is streaming such a simple endeavor that's not complicated at all and is perfect every time. So without further ado, here is World Building Wednesdays that happened on Thursday. Enjoy. Hi, how you doing? This is Matt, your chaotic and writer. Thank you everybody for tuning into tonight's stream. Tonight I am going to be digging into a subject that I literally researched yesterday. So this is very off the cuff, no major planning, except I did take a huge chunk of my time today to actually put together a bit of a presentation and a way to present these ideas to you, the community. Thank you once again for tuning into the stream. My name is Matt, your chaotic and writer, and this is World Building Wednesdays, although it is not Wednesdays. So, sometimes I run this segment on a day that's not Wednesday. What else am I gonna change my branding? No, I'm not gonna change my branding. I'm gonna keep it the same, no matter what. Hello, Elderberry. Hello, Slippery Ram. And to anybody that pops in later on in the stream. So, here's the agenda for the evening. I have put together a little bit of a presentation, and it's going to be sort of a snappy thing because we got 20 story plot types to go through. And the reason I want to do this as a topic and a subject tonight is I wanted to be able to do a stream that is like a companion stream to some of the things that we are presently doing in Project Aurora. And of course, to anybody that has popped in that doesn't know what Project Aurora is, well, it is a fantastic project that you can get on the ground floor. It is a living universe Dungeons and Dragons setting with multiple DMs, multiple campaigns, many more players, and one universe where this all takes place in. The goal of tonight's stream is to go through these plot types, to briefly talk about what these plot types are, how they function within a fiction or world building or built world setting, give examples of what each plot type, how they're represented in movies, for instance. Do a little bit of brainstorming about how each of these plot types actually manages to, how each of these plot types can be implemented into like a Dungeons and Dragons setting. And then I'm going to take it a step further, and I'm going to be talking about the prospective settings that we have assembled and we have put together for the mini project of Project Aurora. Those settings being Clockwork Skies / Green Tide, Mama Fights Back, and what's the third one? Oh yeah, this is Dragon Racing one. So okay, so wait, what's the official name of the Dragon Racing one? That's the one I need to refresh on. It's literally just called Dragon Racing. On your mark, that's one it is. Okay, sweet. So yeah, the point of tonight's stream is to kind of do some free associations, some free brainstorming and world building for that. Now, I'm not. The thing is that I'll be fair. I'm not even going to mention the fourth. I'm not even going to mention the fourth one because it is the one that is not arisen to the top. It has fallen to the bottom. So I don't even know if it's necessary for me to mention it. And for the most part, I might actually be talking mostly about Clockwork Skies personally, but hey, I mean, we'll be getting into the other concepts. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, in this mini project, we have a whole bunch of DMs, a whole bunch of lore masters, homebrew people, etc., artists, musicians that are all engaging in this project where there's going to be an entire setting built out, a bunch of lore written. There are going to be one-shots run that are going to sort of sync up with each other. Different things happening in one shot will affect other things in another one shot. And so, as a companion piece to that, I'm hoping to utilize these 20 story plots in a way of thinking from a macro sense. How could these story plots be applied completely to whether it be a single one shot or an overarching story that happens within one of these settings? In short, the Clockwork Skies, I'm just going to call it Clockwork Skies. The Clockwork Skies setting is steampunk on a floating city above a rampant wilderness. And then you have On Your Mark, which is all about dragon racing. And then you have Mama Fights Back, which is a Western, but also nature poses as I don't know if I would say antagonist. It poses as an enemy to the adventuring and economic forces that are trying to take over this, I would say, relatively untamed wilderness. So, before we dig into that, though, I do have to do my proper adverts. I want to actually make a couple announcements here. God, I gotta clean some stuff up, but that's fine. So, I do have a Patreon, and the Patreon is for many different things, but in particular, I've begun the process of developing specialized one-shots to be ran specifically for the patron community. The first one that I'm going to be running is one called Cleanup of Legends, which is a League of Legends inspired one shot where you play the minions, and you're playing the minions in between matches where their job is to clean up Summoner's Rift. But then there's other things that are, other risks that one must take in this process, and some sort of mystery of which I will not reveal the details for. So that is That is one shot that I will be running. Another one will be based upon Honey Heist, and that will show up in the near future. So if you are interested in any of that stuff, or you want to support the stream, or you want to support the website or anything like that, feel free to go down in the doobly-doo, check out the Patreon link, and yeah, you know, there are many different tiers available. Sorry, over here. There are many different tiers available. Whichever tier you think is best for you, I empower you to do so. The other thing that I want to show ya here is I should have a... Just jumping back into my stream for the most part, I usually have a thing that shows my website. But you know what? We don't need to do that. We don't need to talk about my website tonight. We could actually go right in to our presentation. So, buckle up, buckaroos. We are going to go through all 20 tonight within the span of, I'll say, 2.5 hours. I'm going to need plenty of liquid for this. So, also, if you are a patron, this will be a video that you will be able to reference in the future. It will, of course, stick around on my Twitch account for 2 weeks, but after that, I will put it onto my YouTube account, and it will be available for patrons only. So, let us begin. And first topic of the night is going to be... Well, that looked a little weird. It's going to be the first plot type, which is what is known as the epic quest. Now, before I actually talk about it, I got to get the timer rolling, because I can only spend about 6 minutes on each subject. And let's remove the display capture. We don't get that confused. Cool. All right. So, without further ado, let us begin the countdown. Boom. So, our first plot type, appropriate for any Dungeons and Dragons setting, especially those of traditional fantasy setting, is what is known as the epic quest, otherwise the hero's journey. It is a character-driven story that has a hero go on a journey for something that changes... It says him, but them. It changes them in some way. A majority of traditional sci-fi fantasy stories follow this format in some way, shape, or form. So essentially, when you really break it down, I mean, this is an epic quest. If you're somebody who likes fantasy fiction, you know what an epic quest is. It is in the form of an individual being given a particular thing that they have to complete in order to save others, in order to secure their future, in order to secure the future of those around them, in order to fend off some sort of antagonistic evil in the world. It is this great, big fanfare of an adventure. And throughout that journey, this character goes through a drastic transformation from their youthful origins to their veteran status of nearing completion or having completed the journey. And of course, examples of this would be Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, The Matrix, Spider-Man. Big, bold epics. Now, in terms of Dungeons and Dragons, when you really think about it, D&D gets a lot of its inspiration from traditional folklore and from the sort of the literary folklore of the early 20th century. A lot of the tropes and a lot of the ideas that appear in let's say, you know, that appear in Lord of the Rings, for instance, or The Hobbit, they have shown their way into Dungeons and Dragons. And so it's just, you know, it's a match made in heaven. An epic quest, sword and sorcery, they go together like peas and carrots. Now, in terms, I don't even need to talk a whole lot about character arcs, but each of the main characters in many of the story examples that I've mentioned, they have some sort of, you know, main character that has, you know, they're living in a world of stasis. You know, the thing that they see in the morning is the same thing they see at night for the most part. And it is by way of some sort of drastic inciting incident that they are thrown into the mix, and they have to make a decision to leave stasis and begin their journey. For Lord of the Rings, it's basically coming into possession of the ring and then realizing what the ring is and what must be done with it. Star Wars, very much the same in terms of Luke encountering, you know, like the original Star Wars, Luke encountering Obi-Wan Kenobi, realizing his history, realizing that his destiny is with that his destiny is with the rebellion, basically. So I was hoping to actually do this, to kind of run this in such a way where I would be able to write up notes, but I'm realizing something actually. I'm realizing something as I'm doing this, that I'm going to have to crunch notes within a minute. So if I'm giving myself 6 minutes for each section, that doesn't give a lot of brainstorming time. Not a whole lot. Although there's not a whole lot of it. I'm actually gonna skip the brainstorming for Epic Quest because I think it's pretty self-explanatory. We are all very aware of these tales and these stories. So for the last minute, what I'm actually going to do is I am going to instead let y'all know that I may be running Stream Raiders if I can manage to get enough people in a chat. So if you are interested in me running Stream Raiders for everybody, I can certainly do so on the condition that I must have a handful of people in chat that are willing to play Stream Raiders, willing to run Stream Raiders. If not, that's fine. We could just focus on the topic at hand and we can move forward. Gotcha. All right. Well, so that's going to be the end of that topic. Moving to the next plot type. Let's see here. Let me make sure I have that. Capture Chrome. All right. Okay. Boy, I just realized that I'm going to be doing a lot of talking tonight. Boom. So, in terms of the second plot type that is amongst these 20 types of plot, is going to be an adventure. Now, you're probably thinking, what's the difference between an adventure and an epic quest? Well, the main idea with an adventure is there isn't an inciting incident necessarily. Well, no, there's an inciting incident. It's not something that is pulling the character towards a set resolution. It's rather pushing the character out into the world. It is the exploration, the wandering of the world, you know, getting to actually experience the wilderness, being actually able to experience life, leaving your small hamlet and going out into the sunset. And so it's a lot less structured, because most anything could happen on this journey. You can completely roll the dice, and a new creature can make their way into the fray, a new person, a disaster of sorts, an injury, a case of irregular circumstances. So some examples of that would be like The Hobbit or Slumdog Millionaire or Big Fish. I don't know if you all have seen the movie Big Fish, but it's one big sort of folklore, you know, tall tale retelling, or not retelling, but it's a tall tale movie. For the most part, when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, this kind of makes for the majority of D&D sessions in campaigns that I've seen, because a lot of times when a campaign goes on, the characters might have a particular plot hook, they might have a particular quest that they're on, but a lot of times they like to go off into their own direction, right? They like to, you know, just kind of explore and discover. It is big on the explore column of Dungeons and Dragons and of tabletop role-playing games. A character that has the yearning for adventure is likely somebody who started off in very humble origins and is, you know, looking to test themselves, or somebody who is a thrill seeker and is looking to, you know, take a bite out of the world, to come at the world head on, headstrong. And the thing is that when it comes to, you know, an adventure, that's the majority of what, you know, you find in a game like Dungeons and Dragons. It's the majority of what you would find in anything where, you know, where an individual comes back to the fray and instead of thinking about the long game, they're thinking more episodically. They're thinking, you know, what do I want to do today? What kind of fun or challenge or trouble do I want to get into today? That's much more of an adventure than it is a quest. Now, if I wanted to pivot towards talking about, like, for instance, the current phase of Project Aurora, which I should mention that the entire point of this small project that I've been talking about is many one-shots with their plots interconnected in some way. I would say that there isn't necessarily anything unique to bring from an adventure standpoint, because it is sort of the byproduct of playing the game in general. However, if I was like discussing a very particular character, a singular character, that their desire is to adventure the world, I would say that, you know, that also that encompasses the entire idea of being an adventurer. That even if you are somebody that has a dramatic premise, there's a specific thing that you wish to accomplish. There's a specific thing that you're trying to escape. There's a particular thing that you're trying to strive towards. Doesn't matter what it is. You are eventually going to reach a point where you are high on your own adventure. You're high on your own journey, and you want to roll the dice. That is completely what this plot type is based on. It is not dependent upon any particular setting, which is one to be sure. But it is dependent upon any setting where free reign, free travel, adventure, things that are to be done, but are to be done in a way that one prefers to do them at one's leisure. That is, for the most part, those are the kind of settings that are wrapped in adventure. Elder Bear mentions that Forrest Gump is an example, which absolutely true. It is an example of the adventure plot type. Different from the quest plot type, because Forrest Gump does not have a particular quest. He is simply growing and going through life and getting into all sorts of interesting shenanigans on the way. Moving onward, I want to talk about one that doesn't necessarily have to do with adventure outright. More specifically, pursuit. This is your chase movie. This is one person pursuing another throughout the story. The individual being pursued may often be cornered and then escape, because that's, it's not a constant chase. It's usually something that, it's usually bursts of action with with both of the individuals trying to outmaneuver each other in more subtle ways, and then another burst of action, and then being cornered and then escaping. There's that entire flow to a chase scene, and so a movie or a plot based upon a chase is definitely something that has a lot of this stop and go motion when it comes to the execution of the story. At some point, the individual being chased may eventually be caught, or they may get away. The person being chased can change. In other words, it could very well be that the thing that's being chased is not a person, but an item. And so if that item exchanges ownership, then that individual becomes a new target of the chase. Can often be paired with revenge, especially in cases where a chase may mean life or death, especially in a case where a chase is about apprehending somebody. Examples of this would be the movie Catch Me If You Can, The Fugitive. Actually, I was going to mention that any Dan Brown book. I was actually going to mention the Da Vinci Code is technically a pursuit. It should be mentioned that all of the plot types here are not standalone. You're going to have movies where there's going to be a pursuit, there's going to be escape scenes. It can be something based upon an epic quest. These plot types are not insular to an entire story. However, the majority of a story can be dictated by a very particular plot type. These in particular are examples of such media that are pretty much dominated by a pursuit of some sort. So here's where things actually do get interesting. We're actually starting to break the mold a little bit. If we're talking about a tabletop experience like Dungeons and Dragons, the thing is that when you think of things in terms of a quest or in terms of an adventure, they're byproducts of the game itself. You can't really build all that interesting of a character background off of those two things alone. However, now we're getting into plot types where there is, a particular dramatic need of a character of a particular like NPC or an actual like player character, where there's a broader story happening here. If I created a character where their entire plot point was the pursuit of somebody who was escaping them, the pursuit of somebody who had, say, wronged them or murdered somebody close to them or had stolen something, then that is a strong driver for that individual to begin a journey. That is a strong driver for an individual to find a party, and for that individual to help steer the party in that direction. The thing is that in a tabletop role-playing sense, or a D&D sense, you do have the dynamic of player and dungeon master. And of course, dungeon master is somebody that hosts the game, that runs the entire session, somebody who creates the circumstances, creates the challenges that the characters encounter. So it would stand to reason that to have a character whose dramatic need is a pursuit would probably have to work very closely with the dungeon master, and have the dungeon master actually play this NPC that this character is trying to pursue, and to make that a strong part of the central plot. Now, if we're talking broader about the mini project, multiple one-shots, the thing is that you could have like this big overarching story that is centered. I'm going to go a little over time with this, but a big overarching story that is centered upon a pursuit, upon the acquisition of something. And it could be that this item passes hands. It passes from one hand to another. So this important item passes from one party, and then they get to the checkpoint, and then pass it off to the next party, which move on to the next checkpoint in the next one shot, which bring this item to a third party that move on to their checkpoint. So something like a pursuit would work actually very well for a living universe set of one shots like this. You would need full cohesion of everybody in the project, basically everybody's, making the determination that yes, we want this to be an overarching plot that we're all going to build our sessions around. But it doesn't necessarily need to be that. It could simply be the thing that perhaps links one story to another, one shot to another one shot. And so I imagine that for these one shots, it's important to draw some sort of line between all of these individual adventures in some way. And a pursuit is definitely a way to go for that. A pursuit in any story is something that will definitely heighten the action. So something to be considered if you are writing any adventure story, any sort of sci-fi or fantasy story that has a sense of adventure, a sense of thrill. You will want to have one person try to apprehend another. So we're going to move on from pursuit to our next topic. That's going to be rescue. Unlike pursuit, rescue, you have to presume that somebody is imprisoned. And the goal of the main character is to free that individual from their imprisonment. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about iron bars. I am talking about a dangerous situation. It could be somebody who is injured in the middle of the wilderness somewhere, high up on a glacier, for instance, that must be rescued, must be freed in order to complete the story. Now the thing is, that could involve an antagonist or antagonistic force. You're fighting against, you're fighting against the clock, against nature itself, or fighting against the clock against an individual who is threatening the person that needs rescuing. There may be a triangle drawn between the main character, the antagonist, and the prisoner, of which there is a complex string of interesting character dynamics taking place. Of course, some examples of this in practice in a plot would be Die Hard, The Martian, Escape from New York. Obviously, I'm choosing more action movies, adventure films. Those are the ones that I get really into. Elderberry says Hangover could be considered a rescue, definitely on the silly side. You are correct, actually. It does have a rescue. That is a huge part of the Hangover. Another rescue. You can bend things a little bit, and you could suggest that, for instance, The Dark Knight Rises is a story about rescue. That rescue doesn't necessarily have to be a place, but it could be a situation. Now in a tabletop sense, there are plenty of potential quests. There are plenty of potential adventures where a rescue might be the point of that adventure. Doing so creates an automatic sense of connection with the person that's being rescued. So it's a great way to introduce an NPC, a notable and likable NPC. It may even be better if you represent this NPC in the beginning as a friendly individual that the party likes, the party enjoys, but then they go missing or they are captured. That is an automatic hook for the party. They are going to topple over each other in order to make sure that they pursue and they find a way to break their friend out of their situation. Now, from a broader sense, if we were to consider a rescue within a setting of multiple adventures where the dungeon masters are collaborating with each other, this plot type of a rescue is definitely something that would be really unique, would be really helpful. It would provide some way to exchange a priority between one group and another. It could very well be that, for instance, if one party of adventurers in a one-shot perform their deed, but one of them get captured, then that person captured is the individual that has to be rescued by a completely different party. That is certainly a way to make that happen. Thank you. I do appreciate looking after my health like this. Elderberry says, if your party doesn't have to get one of their members out of jail, I applaud you. Well, at some point they'll have to get their party member out of jail. In addition, on top of that, what if we went even broader? And what if we said that an entire story was a rescue? Usually there are rescues in stories. There are cases where the entire story itself is a rescue. Some of those examples are examples of that. But for instance, what if in Clockwork Skies, there is a terrible risk of the floating city collapsing upon the ground and being destroyed. The only individual that can possibly prevent this from happening is a masterwork engineer who has been captured by the Fey forces on the surface. That would make for a number of individual adventures and individual sessions in order to prevent this catastrophe from taking place. It's all down to making sure that this one individual makes it out safe. So we're at plot type 4 already, so we're making good time so far. Hey Sean, how you doing? It's good to see you. Good to see you, Majid. At this point, we're gonna move on to plot type 5. Now, what is the 5th plot type, you may ask? It is an escape. So far we talked about pursuits, we talked about rescues, and now we're going to talk about escapes. Today, I guess today we're talking about plot points. I was gonna do more of a collaborative brainstorming, but I realized that 20 plot types, I'd only have 6 minutes per plot type. But of course, we could still do, we could still do discussion on each of these. Now, for an escape, very much similar to the pursuit, except the main character is on the other side of that exchange. The main character is the one being chased, with the pursuer being an antagonist or antagonistic force trying to stop them. A pursuit often follows suit, of course, can otherwise be a solo escape from danger. Some examples of this would be Mad Max Fury Road, perfect example. Shawshank Redemption, that's an escape. That is an escape from a prison. I put Cube because I don't know if any of y'all have seen the Cube movie. It is a horror thriller about individuals in basically this giant shifting cube construct, which is this Kafka-esque machine of death. And I'm a huge fan of that movie. It's definitely an angsty movie, but I honestly really enjoy that movie. So in that case, it's this machine that individuals are trying to figure out a way to escape from. To answer your question, Sean, there is a Cube 2 and a Cube 3. They're not nearly as good as the first one. Not nearly. 13 Ghosts. That's another movie that fits the escape theme. So, like before, an escape is something that can happen in a story rather than it being something that encapsulates an entire story. However, in Dungeons and Dragons, it is not uncommon to start your characters off in a position where they have to break out of jail. It's actually a really compelling and really dangerous circumstance to put your players in. Aside from simply an escape from jail, imagine, now this is more difficult because the thing is that when it comes to the experience of a game such as Dungeons and Dragons, you want to be able to empower the players with the sense that they can take on the world. It can be really challenging to try to put your players in a circumstance where they don't have that power to simply vanquish their foe. that they have to flee, and that an entire small arc of that story is escaping, because that, you know, that's not as cathartic as overcoming your enemy, right? However, if you are daring enough as a dungeon master, and if you are somebody who knows how to execute it well, you could make sure the characters and the players understand that the force that is pursuing them is not one that they will be able to vanquish, and that it is coming for them. And so to that degree, you can create all sorts of unique challenges and unique circumstances that would otherwise not be a part of your game, because the object of the players, of the object of the characters, is to get away. It could end up being a pursuit with an item that the characters possess, that this massive force, that this empire of this unstoppable army is trying to pursue the characters for, and that they need to be able to get that item to its destination in order to stop the pursuit. I guess another good example would be Rogue One. I think so. It's the end of Rogue One, rather. Sean says, once I played where we had to escape like gladiator slavering. That was quite interesting. Yeah, so usually plots like this have some sort of imprisonment. But they don't necessarily need to be imprisonment. It has to be a situation where you are basically telling your characters that combat is not direct combat is not the best way to deal with this. You need to get away. You can use stealth, you can use social ties, you can use disguise, you can use your agility, you can use a number of different tools that many characters and players probably would have not used if they were just doing a typical Dungeons and Dragons session or campaign. So if you wish to execute an escape arc, an escape plot in a session or in a number of sessions, there is reward for doing it, as long as you can impress it enough upon the players through your storytelling and through your through your proper informing of the characters and of the players, that an escape is going to be the priority, that direct combat is just not going to work. And Indiana Jones, absolutely. Shoot, what's the module where everybody starts imprisoned by dark elves in the Underdark? That is Out of the Abyss. That is the Wizards of the Coast module, Out of the Abyss, for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. All right, so we've gotten through 5 of these. We're making good time. I'm gonna go right into the next one. So these are 5. Oh dear. Okay, so revenge. Everybody loves a good revenge story. The antagonist does something morally reprehensible, has wronged the main character. The main character goes through a pit of suffering, and you as an audience member are just emotionally wrecked and sympathetic with the character, and you want them to find a way out of their torment, and that character decides they're going to take matters into their own hands. So of course, I should mention that any Batman movie for the most part belongs in this range, but of course I don't want to just say a popular movie franchise for the sake of saying it, just because the character might say it in 1 or 2 of the movies anyways. But Whole premise: an individual is wronged and seeks retribution against the person or organization which betrayed or harmed them, often centered upon moral outrage or a personal vendetta. V for Vendetta, that's a revenge story. Count of Monte Cristo, that's a revenge story. John Wick, Kill Bill, Inigo Montoya, and the Six-Fingered Man. That is absolutely correct. So revenge story, I feel like nowadays, especially in tabletop games, when it comes to like a character arc, there's usually, I don't think there has been much of any campaign that I've been a part of where at least one character had a revenge arc in some way, shape, or form. This is another situation where that player coordinates directly with the dungeon master and specifically defines what the wrong was, and who had wronged them as an individual. Naturally, revenge can be counterbalanced with justice, because the general idea is sometimes you are a figure who is legitimately seeking justice, legitimately trying to put somebody away for a terrible thing they did, but revenge, it's more hot-blooded. It is much more fiery. The idea is an eye for an eye, or 2 eyes for an eye, or I will chop your head off for an eye. Whatever extent that an individual practicing revenge wants to, whatever the extent that they want to take it, essentially. This is where things get morally gray for a character, because a lot of times any good character that has a revenge story arc is a character that is being challenged on their motives, is a character that is may or may not be second guessing themselves on their motive, because throughout the journey of trying to commit to this revenge, they have to make do with the fact that the revenge might have its own consequences, that revenge might not bring somebody to closure, that revenge might only beget even more blood from somebody else. So any character with a good revenge story arc will be somebody who is specifically engaging with that desire of theirs to right a wrong. And at some point, they're going to have to make a decision. They're going to be brought into a certain circumstance where they're going to be able to actually determine, do I take revenge? Do I seek justice? Or do I seek forgiveness? I don't necessarily imagine revenge as something that is very well applied to a broader, like a broader tabletop campaign, if we're talking tabletop, because revenge is usually something between one individual and another, one organization to another. It's usually in the backdrop. It's the drama in the backdrop of the setting, rather than it defining the setting. You can have an entire session about revenge. Don't get me wrong. Heist movies are revenge stories. You can have like an epic heist against somebody that has wronged the party, 100%. Like in individual session, sure, but an entire campaign will require a lot of discipline from all of the individual characters in that adventure, in that campaign. Sean says, do you think revenge could be done with one PC wanting revenge on another PC, like done well? I don't know. And the thing is that if you're talking about PCs in the same party, that's tricky. The entire point of a party is cohesion. The entire point of being able to run a game at the table is that you have a number of players playing a number of characters who are working together. It gets very annoying when you have to split the party up into two groups and then switch back and forth between them. It gets really annoying when the petty feuds of individual characters takes up a whole chunk of an adventure. But these are legitimate story beats, right? So I would say in a multi-DM setting where there are multiple campaigns, having one PC from one campaign and another PC from another campaign having a rivalry against each other, that to me works a whole lot better, because in that case you could actually you could run particular adventures and stories that may affect the other party in a way that they don't realize until it gets to their adventure. I think though within a singular party that's rough to run, because the priority one is party cohesion. And revenge, unless it's like just this petty revenge, like I'm putting it on hold while we're working together, but the longer you work together, the less you're going to hate somebody, hopefully. But those are my thoughts on revenge when it comes to D&D parties, at least. We're going to move on to plot type 7 for this discussion. Making good time. We are an hour in, and we're about a third of the way in. We are on time, my friends. So allow us to move forward. Plot type 7, the riddle. It's a mystery or puzzle box adventure of words. It is often a mystery or puzzle box of sorts. The riddle challenges the main character and audience to discover the solution as clues and evidence are uncovered. It may include a race against time. Any mystery is a riddle. Any Agatha Christie book is a riddle. You as the reader of an Agatha Christie book, you might figure out what the answer to a mystery is before the main character does. And I think there's a lot of potential in a murder mystery or like a crime thriller, something where a detective or the main character has to unravel secrets in order to put those puzzle pieces together. Perfect examples of that would be like The Batman, which is the newer rendition of Batman that came out just this year, 2022. National Treasure, Nicolas Cage entertaining us with his unveiling of secrets behind the Declaration of Independence. The movie Seven is a fantastic horror psychological thriller, which basically 7 people are killed by the 7 deadly sins in the fashion of the 7 deadly sins. I will not spoil anything aside from that. And so, mysteries are things that can happen within a story naturally. To have a mystery within, you know, an underlying mystery of somebody's background as a character is especially compelling, because they might be going through the events of the story in such a way where they are uncovering bits and pieces of this truth, or maybe they don't understand what it is that's in front of them until a pivotal moment in the story. Another example of a riddle, any crime noir movie is also a riddle. I am a huge, I didn't hit the button, did I? So I'm going to bring that down to 3 minutes. I am a huge fan of the movie Chinatown. That is like your quintessential classic detective noir film, right? And that movie has some particular moments in it that are, you know, that are light bulb moments for the main character. Realizing that, you know, putting the pieces together, they all come together at the same time as soon as this key is unveiled. So, given that it's such a compelling part of a story, it would therefore make sense that, you know, to have an individual character in an arc, for instance, in a tabletop game, perhaps it is a literal puzzle box. Perhaps they have an item of which they're trying to figure out how to unlock it, and so they're on the quest to try to find out more about this literal puzzle box. I'm not talking about the movie Hellraiser. I'm talking more about like the Da Vinci Code, or a puzzle being something in their past that is unclear, that they need to unveil by encountering individuals who may have known their family's past or something. In tabletop, in Dungeons and Dragons, coming up with this riddle is sort of makes the player into a bit of a DM themselves, because they essentially, I mean, the thing is that if I'm designing a character, I need to be able to kind of speak to the fact that if there's going to be a riddle, I have to already figure out as the player what the answer to that riddle is going to be, or leave it up to the dungeon master to figure out the answer to that riddle. But then work with the dungeon master to basically say, hey, my character is seeking their father. My character is trying to find out what happened to their sibling. And there is a lot of potential for huge cliffhangers, not cliffhangers, but huge reveals, big momentous moments where everything fits together all at once. Memento is also a great example of a movie with a riddle, and that one toys with the idea of time and of memory, and it goes back and backwards into time, and you're piecing things together as older memories come to fruition. I like it a lot. That's a great movie example. I would say, yeah, but in short, if let's say I was a character and I was trying to come up with some sort of riddle for if I was a player trying to come up with a riddle for my characters to solve, that's my character's story arc, that would require a lot of one-on-one work with the dungeon master. Basically, you know, coming up with a premise. I'm trying to figure out what happened to this, or what is the mystery behind this, and then allow the dungeon master to be like, okay, well, let me come up with the details, and then we'll go through that with you. Otherwise it takes some of the thrill away from the player if the player knows everything. As a party, it could definitely be like they are trying to uncover what happened on a very particular event. Is how a story is told in history, is that true, or did something else happen that day? Or, you know, a literal uncovering the lore of a device, or the lore of an organization or something. And you could pack it on top of a chase. You could pack it on top of like a race against time. And I think like if there was a collaborative setting, like say for example, if there was a particular reason or mystery as to why the wilderness was attacking civilization in Mama Fights Back, if there's a particular mystery behind it, then that could be an overarching story beat for overarching premise for many different parties to try to uncover pieces of that mystery. But of course, you could just put the Riddler in the middle of Clockwork Skies, and you know, if you don't solve the riddle, then the floating city explodes. There's always something like that can be done as well. All right, we're gonna reach plot type 7 here. Let us go. Rivalry. Similar to revenge, but not quite a revenge. In this case, you have two people or groups that are competing, either friendly or hostile. Rivals know that there can be only one winner, where they strategize and vie for resources. Examples of this would be The Fast and the Furious, West Side Story, Godzilla versus King Kong. This is not a revenge story. This is two individuals head to head competing against each other. I think a rivalry is something that is a lot more compelling if both individuals of this rivalry were of very similar power, or were unique in their own way of circumventing the whims of the other individual. And rivalries are fun for the sake that there are left and right hooks back and forth, and you have different scenes where one rival is getting the advantage on another rival in a particular circumstance, and then before you know it, that right hook comes in the next scene and the other individual gets their 2 cents in. And having these two profound forces fighting each other and vying for supremacy makes for a very interesting story type. So, digging into like Dungeons and Dragons, that's difficult to have within an inter-party setting. However, not difficult to have if it's like a rivalry between, let's say, if one individual character. Actually, I played this as a character before. I had a rogue who was a charlatan, someone who basically was a fake art dealer. And so the city that they were initially from was this curator capital, and they had a way with trying to work, try to work their way into a position where they can steal a piece of art. However, they had a rival, an NPC, a tiefling, who was in the same game as them. And they would, they would circumvent the player, or they would fend off against the player by basically beating them at their own game. They would always be one step ahead of them in one way, shape, or form. The strategy that one individual takes to acquire an item is different from a second individual strategy. And so the first individual figures that they pulled it off successfully. They went it alone, but then they realized that the piece of art has already been replaced. This is the fake one. So rivalries don't necessarily have to be violent competitions. They could be competitions mano a mano, spy versus spy. They could be rivalries that are economic in certain ways. There is the premise of in Project Aurora, the setting type that we had entertained, which is the Western setting where nature is fighting back against nature is fighting back against these human invaders who are Western cowboys, and there are these two companies that are trying to extract resources from this land. Well, those two companies are rivals against each other. That does not necessarily need to be at the forefront. It could be in the backdrop. It could be something where these two companies are paying top dollar for adventurers. And so if you're running these one shots, you have party members in working for one of these companies, party members working for the other company. Maybe you have different parties working for each, working for one company or another, and they compete against each other. They can be rivals by proxy. You can, like in a steampunk setting, like say, for example, if we are talking Clockwork Skies, with the city floating up in the air and the wilderness below, because it's steampunk, you're probably going to have more access to more sophisticated weaponry. You could have two special interest groups that are trying to get control of Clockwork Sky, of the city in Clockwork Skies. You could have two arms manufacturers that are trying to get the upper hand over each other, and so they have a great interest in attracting adventurers so they could test out prototypes. I'm going to go a little over on the zero. And then, of course, there's the other premise that the individuals in Project Aurora came up with, and that is the on your mark setting, which is the dragon racing. My goodness, a racing arc without a rivalry, and you're missing something. A sports movie without a rivalry, and you're missing something. So if you had dragons racing against each other, you have to have like prominent individuals who are neck and neck against each other, that absolutely hate each other's guts, and one of them fights dirty, the other one's the underdog. There's all sorts of ways that you can make a rivalry work in that setting, because a race is a competition and so is a rivalry. These things come together like bread and butter. So I think that's enough of me talking about rivalries. I've noticed a couple more people have jumped in. Hello. Thank you very much for popping into the stream as I'm going through these plot types. You know how I do. Sometimes I just run streams where I get all brainy space and I talk about I talk about stuff in storytelling, and we, generally just, we riff back and forth, and then I have some sort of presentation. So I threw this together literally within the past 24 hours. But because I got 20 of them to go through, I can only spend 6 minutes per subject. So that is why I'm going the whole way through every single premise, 6 minutes each. Just want to change the aurora in my room. Okay, so we are going to venture forward. By the way, if you have jumped in a little later, I appreciate you checking out the stream and enjoying yourself here. Also, don't forget to be a dear and consider joining the community by hitting that follow button. Sorry, I was trying to find the particular source to turn on. Hey, if you like this content, I do world building streams, but I also do actual Dungeons and Dragons gameplay. Usually on Thursdays I run Tales of Siglasia, but we're on break right now. There are going to be some adventures and one-shots coming down the line in this next month. I am excited, so please tune into those. And let us continue. Now we've reached plot type number 9. Speaking of rivalries, the premise of a rivalry usually is, as I make sure that I hit the timer. Yes, the premise of a rivalry usually is that you have two opposing forces competing against each other, and to some extent these two opposing forces have to be on a similar tier to one another. That is, for the most part, what makes rivalries so profound. Otherwise, if there is a power differential between one party and the other, that is an underdog situation. That is a large force against a small force, where the dramatic premise, the audience they're gonna want to root for the underdog taking victory over the big guy. So very similar to a rivalry, but the main character has less advantage and would be expected to fail. And there's the key thing: is an underdog is somebody who very much would fail in any situation, but it is through sheer tenacity and determination that they're able to overcome their opponent. And examples to this also found very strong within very strongly within sports movies. Any sort of competition-based movie, races, anything where there is a rookie, and that rookie has to beat a pro. That's an underdog story. So remember, the Titans is such a movie. I would say Remember the Titans is an underdog tale. It's an underdog tale because you're putting a group of players with cultural differences against mostly homogenous groups of players, and you are having this team go for the championship. Then there is 300. Of course, 300 as a movie is basically 300 Spartans against all of the Persian Empire. It's it's war propaganda. What can I tell you? And then there's like Karate Kid. You have a lot of times there's those kids sports movies like The Big Green or like Karate Kid, where you have kids fighting on different teams. The Mighty Ducks can be considered an underdog tale. Miracle can be considered an underdog tale. I'm going a lot into sports, but typically, yeah, Little Giants, that's another one. But if we were to exit the world of sports and we were to enter the world of adventure, an underdog tale would be basically anything where the lead players, the main characters, David and Goliath, I do mention David and Goliath on there, where the main characters are fighting a losing battle against a massive force. Star Wars, the original trilogy and the new trilogy, not the prequels, because the prequels doesn't really count for that. Both are underdog tales. Rogue One is an underdog tale. Underdog tales oftentimes can be accompanied with tales of revolt and rebellion. Underdog tales can be tales of very similar to like a coming of age story, where you have a particular character in their youth and inexperience, and of course, in order to demonstrate that inexperience, you have to see them fail. And so they end up reaching a particular moment, reach a particular situation where they are thrust forward into their training, into their experiences, and by the end, they have enough power to take the big bad head on. Where the big bad, there's a reason why the BBEG, the big bad evil guy, is first letter capital B, big. It's because they are a massive force, and there's nothing sweeter than a story where you have characters usurping and overthrowing a tyrant. Perfect example. An underdog tale, in some of the settings that we've proposed, it's a little tough because you need to establish an antagonist or antagonistic force that is a tyrant, that is surefire a tyrant. I'm going to go a little over. And then once you've defined the tyrant, you need to start thinking about what are the ways that a little person, that a small person in that circumstance can subvert and challenge that system. So Clockwork Skies, if we were going with that one, imagine for a moment, of course, you have the reckless wilderness below, but then you have this floating city that is a safe haven. But what if this floating safe haven of a city was authoritarian? What if it was a crony, like a society run by cronies, like corrupt individuals who basically just want to siphon all of the wealth for themselves. So they have all the resources, they have all the power, and that the characters are basically they're the street rats. They're the people who hang out in the undercarriage sections of this floating city, and they got a plan for a revolt or for a heist or for something that can stick it to the forces that govern the city. That would be a sick underdog tale. So moving on, we're gonna get to plot type 10, and then I'm gonna take a short break. Plot type 10 is temptation. Starting the clock, boom skis. The apple of Eden. A person is tempted. Also, I threw the term apple of Eden in there. I hope that doesn't actually reference a literal thing. Probably does. It probably is my mistake. A person is tempted by something that would diminish them if taken. The battle is oftentimes internal and requires constitution. Not literal stat constitution, but constitution is in willpower. This can break into rivalry and chase in the right circumstance. An example of this, I threw down Lord of the Rings because it is all about the ring and the power that the ring can give. It is a power of sheer temptation. And so no matter where Frodo brings the ring, there are eyes following his every move because they sense the temptation coming from the ring in one way, shape, or form. There's a movie called Devil's Advocate, which is Keanu Reeves and what's his face? Bad with names right now, but Devil's Advocate is basically about a young new lawyer who's given this perfect opportunity to work at a law firm, and he is basically being pampered, but realizing that his boss is the devil, is literally the devil. And so a temptation story could be something that is focused on something that drives temptation, like sex or drugs or rock and roll. But temptation could be, could be theft, greed, could be lust. Now we're talking about the deadly sins. And I believe that a story about temptation will have some being in power who is tempting a smaller being, or is offering to make a deal with this smaller being and tempting them to make this deal. Perhaps they do take this deal, and it is the result of a temptation. What a devilish situation. So any particular situation where deals with the devil have a say, that have presence in a story, that is a temptation plot. Now, there is another form of temptation. Now, one thing in particular, if we're talking about D&D specifically, one of my favorite published modules for Dungeons and Dragons is Waterdeep Dragon Heist. And that is because it is it's an adventure, a little bit of mystery, a little bit of not really heist, but it's an inner city campaign in pursuit of a particular item that provides the location of money. And so in this circumstance, there is a particular item that can reveal where this money is located, and this item gains a lot of attention by a lot of individuals. There is a pursuit. There could be rivalry between different factions trying to obtain this item. This item is a source of temptation because it can make its wielder pretty powerful. And so anything that has an item of great value that is sought after by many people, that is a temptation story. And Lord of the Rings, like I mentioned, Lord of the Rings. Other forms of temptation could be, I mean, if we're not talking about adventures, any form of temptation could basically I usually Victorian stories are a good example of temptation. I think Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is sort of a temptation story when you really think about it, because there's that temptation to break out of the conventions and become Mr. Hyde and become, the antithesis to the social contract. If you're, somebody who wants to completely, you could have a character that is of two natures, a literal Dr. Jekyll / Mr. Hyde character, who doesn't like who they are when they're Dr. Jekyll, and so is extremely tempted to change themselves in one way or another. How that works on a macro sense, like some of the ideas I said previously about chasing after a particular item because it provide power. But we are about to move on now to metamorphosis. The beast inside. The main character is physically transformed. Let's make sure I get the timer. The main character is physically transformed, either in the form of a beast, a spirit, or something unknown. I say unknown, I really meant etc. The story is the changed person's struggle to be released or to use their new form for a purpose. Perfect examples of this would be the Incredible Hulk, the Underworld franchise of movies, and X-Men. All of these are individuals that would otherwise be human, but their form has changed in one way or another and has given them abilities, has given them detractors, consequences to their being, has made them unfit in society in one way or another. Any story that includes a metamorphosis could be something driven by temptation, the temptation to be the greater thing, to be more. It could be driven by like necessity. Maybe they don't want to be this other thing. Maybe it's just not becoming of them to do it. They just want to have a normal life, but they're thrown into so many situations where they have to continuously bring this metamorphosis out to take care of their problems. You see this in all sorts of horror / monster movies. It's a powerful trope. You have werewolves, you have Dracula, you have I don't know if the Mummy would count in this case, because I think the Mummy is truly enjoying what they're doing with their time. But a metamorphosis sort of challenges this idea of, what if you were more than just human? What if you were an animal? What if you were more powerful? And it entertains all of the factors and the reactions of such a change. In the Incredible Hulk, that is by a particular transformation that makes an individual want to completely smash everything. X-Men, it happens in so many different ways, and it is so disrupting of society's comfort zone that they are othered by their society. In this case, also a Jekyll and Hyde circumstance is a metamorphosis. So nice segue into our previous discussion about temptation. Now, if we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, a character perhaps has a problem with metamorphosis. They are a lycanthrope, for instance. or they are a vampire. I mean, those are like the two go-tos for such an example. Or I mean, it could be more simple that perhaps you have a druid who has a very particular bond with their wild shape. Maybe they dislike being humanoid and prefer to be in their wild shape pretty much at any point where they can handle. I'm trying to think any other class in D&D that engages in a metamorphosis. Wizards with polymorph, I guess. But in terms of like a story, you could have individual characters with this affliction, with this gift that change from one form to another. I mean, when you think about it, Iron Man is also another metamorphosis. It doesn't necessarily need to be something feral. It could be switching between man and machine. We've had in D&D, particular in Project Aurora, there has been circumstances, for instance, in Serpent's Call. Oh my goodness, I'm bad with names right now. I'm trying to remember. Okay, who was literally trying to remember the character that basically built out into a suit of armor in Serpent's Call. It doesn't matter. The general idea is that if you are of a particular character type, where you can morph into something else, there are factors that you experience as an individual that nobody else understands. It is traumatic. It is empowering. It is an experience that alienates you from society. Now, in terms of metamorphosis, from a macro sense, I don't necessarily see how metamorphosis can work its way into like one of the big plots that we've come up with in the mini project of Project Aurora, because those plots are Clockwork Skies, which is floating steampunk cities, On Your Mark, which is dragon racing, and then Mama Fights Back, which is cowboys versus fae, essentially. And so in those circumstances, perhaps there is an affliction, perhaps there is a unique affliction that the fae can place upon a humanoid. Perhaps it's something similar to like how Borg work, where the idea is that they're trying to have individuals join their Gestalt collective consciousness. That could always, that takes place in a metamorphosis theme, or that is a you understand what I'm saying. In Clockwork Skies, I mean, that's steampunk. I imagine there's lycanthropes and such. I think it would be pretty great if individuals could like have a psychic link with dragons in On Your Mark, because that is dragon racing, or are able to morph into dragons. That must also have its own powers and its own limitations. So those are definitely aspects that I see coming now that I've talked through them, that I see coming out of the woodwork in some of the upcoming content that we have planned for Project Aurora. But I have to acknowledge that since I'm keeping this VOD, that I don't want to date myself too much in that, in the discussion of what of things to do in those one shots, but it's interesting to kind of go through those concepts and see what are some cool things that can be implemented. Onward. Plot 12. Transformation. It is not. It still says the beast inside. I did not update that, but that's fine. Transformation is not a metamorphosis, but it is a transformation. It is basically a main character changing as a person. They start as one individual and then come out the other side as another individual, often driven by unexpected circumstances or consequences. After multiple setbacks, the new person emerges, becoming something greater than they were before, for better or worse. Perfect examples of this would be Iron Man, Captain America, the Joker, and Breaking Bad. I should mention that this transformation is not necessarily an ascension. It is something that can be a plummet into darkness. Other examples, as Phoenix V had mentioned, Arthas from World of Warcraft, or Warcraft 3 rather, or Anakin Skywalker. That is a descent into darkness. The main premise is you have to have a start point and an end point, an origin and a destination. But every conflict that happens along the way has to propel that character into its next stage. It's almost never gradual. It's always in bursts. Things that completely change the lens, change the world of this character in larger doses. The descent or ascent is, for the most part, you can think of it as a ladder or a staircase rather than a slope. And it's usually driven mostly by the conflicts that individual encounters. Now, there is the question, as Elder Barry had mentioned. Also, I want to thank YS Books for being the latest follower, and of course the previous followers that I may have not mentioned before. I want to thank you for joining in as well. Internal versus external. Internal transformation versus external. I would say that in the transformation plot type, the changes that happen begin on the internal and they surface on the external. For instance, if we were to take Walter White in Breaking Bad, the way that Walter White looks on the outside, his dress, the condition of his hair, let's just his facial hair and the hair on his head, the way that he holds himself in many circumstances, the way that you see Walter White is driven by the internal change, by the fact that Walter White has made the first step in determining that he wants to start looking into making methamphetamine. His first attempt at that, and then almost getting killed by a rivaling pair of drug dealers. And then his first instance of intentionally killing somebody. These things are ladders. These things are rungs on the ladder. These things are steps towards what eventually makes Walter White who he is by the end of Breaking Bad. Starts as the shy, sort of, generally lovable teacher, and then turns into Scarface by the end. Perfect example of a transformation. But of course, transformation is one of those things that is accompanied in any story that has any of these other plot types involved, especially when you're talking about character development. You're talking about whether it's a main character or a side character. Any journey that any character embarks upon is going to have conflict. Without conflict, you don't have your story. So if a character engages in that adventure, engages towards their dramatic premise, and they come across an obstacle, how they handle that obstacle, how that obstacle affects them, the stress they gain from trying to circumvent that obstacle, the experience they gain, the parts of their old world that they have to shed in order to overcome that obstacle. All of those, once again, rungs on the ladder. Any character in any story with a progression will be undergoing a transformation, but some transformations are greater than others. And so when you're talking about transformation as a plot type, you are drawing in the sand just how drastic those rungs are. And you're narrowing in and focusing on how drastic the situation is, and you were there for the ride with this character as they are going through this transformation. So I do believe that while transformation is an element in every story, there are stories where it is the leading plot type, because it is centered upon a particular person or party or whichever it is, and where they end up by the end. And that is the focus. So in tabletop, that's going to be something that an individual, that a player incidentally encounters with their character. By the time they reach session 12, they might have not noticed it, but their character is already changed. Their character is already changed from what that character was initially planned to be towards what and who that character is in the party, and given the situations that party has experienced thus far. Thank you very much, Majid, for dropping in. I sincerely appreciate you doing so, and you enjoy the rest of your evening. From a macro sense, if we're talking about the mini project, if we're talking about the settings that we've put together as part of Project Aurora, Clockwork Skies. I would really love it as a DM in Lore Master adjacent individual, that I would love it if this floating city and the people inside of this floating city began their journey with one version of themselves, with one version of what society and life was like in that Clockwork City, and then ended as something else. That the conflicts that occurred were citywide. That these conflicts were things that drastically changed the character of the people there and its institutions. That they have a greater sense of what their purpose is, or a change to what their purpose is, or maybe it is a descent into darkness. I want to see a transformation happening in one of these story arcs. I really do. It makes it a little interesting with the second setting, which is cowboys versus Fae, and because anytime you have like a, you know, like a conflict like that, a rivalry like that, there's going to be transformation. On your mark, it's not obvious. It's not obvious what that transformation is. There's dragon racing. That's the premise of the setting, but nothing about it implies that there's going to be a transformation. There isn't a conflict. There's a competition, but there's no story or conflict there as of yet. And so that's, you know, if that ends up becoming the setting of the mini project, then I'd like to see what that conflict is actually made of. And we're going to move forward. Plot type 13. Probably not spend a ton of time on this one, but this is maturation. Coming of age stories. Oh yes. And when I'm saying coming of age, I'm not simply talking about the you know, Oscar nominated movies that are, you know, that have like a contemporary piano playing and is about a child on their journey to adulthood and stuff like that. Like that's a very straightforward kind of story, but that process of maturation is basically transformation, but it's transformation from youth to age. This is where the person grows from their youth, sheds their innocence and naivety, and they find a compass within themselves. They find meaning, and that meaning guides them into their adulthood. Examples of this, some more, I guess more pop culture relevant, maybe more adventurous examples of this would be Scott Pilgrim versus the World. That is, when you really think about it, is a coming of age story, but it's a very fun and funny and nerd heavy, you know, nerd centric coming of age story. Then there's the movie The Bucket List, which is basically that concept, but in reverse, because you might have characters that are older that have sort of lost perspective on their lives. And so they're out to kind of feel young again, or find a better perspective on what it means to feel older, right? Kingkiller Chronicles, that's definitely that is definitely a choice example for sure. I threw Eat, Pray, Love in there because that is kind of your prototypical coming of age story. I would say I haven't seen a lot of characters in an adventure sense, or like in a tabletop sense, a character that is like a young rookie on their journey to become a grizzled veteran. That's not necessarily a story arc I see a whole lot of, unless that character is insightful enough to really play into the innocence, and the fact that innocence is something being replaced by a sense of competency and purpose. I think it takes a lot of discipline from the character to identify that transformation and to recognize certain points of conflict, to let that determine and challenge them to become something different. I would say that on the topic of transformation and maturation, Dungeons and Dragons is a very interesting game. There's this concept called alignment. If you are not familiar with it, it is basically two axes. You have good versus evil, and then you have law versus chaos. And you can be a lawful good individual, or you can be a chaotic good individual. You can be a lawful evil individual or a chaotic evil individual, or you could be neutral. You could be neutral good, neutral evil, chaotic neutral, lawful neutral, true neutral. I have seen in many a session where one's alignment changes. It starts as one thing and then emerges to become something else. Part of the transformation process, I would argue that if it's over a longer period of time, or if it's over a time where an individual starts as a naive youth, then it's more in the maturation category, because it's not somebody challenging their purpose to find another purpose. It's somebody without a purpose discovering their purpose for the first time. If there is some sort of macro version of this to apply to a one-shot setting where the DMs sort of work with each other so that those sessions kind of build off of each other, and that there's sort of a string of a storyline going there, I would say, once again, we're talking about the society as a whole probably maturing, because unless all of the party members are young and it's taking place over many years, I would say that you probably want to have a society that's probably reckless and doesn't have a purpose, and then by the end is bestowed with a new purpose of sorts. And that's all I'm going to spend. That's all the time I'm going to spend on that topic. We're going to move forward. Boom. Plot type 14. A love story. Two hearts is one. It is the perennial tale of lovers finding one another, perhaps in a backdrop of danger and tragedy. Separation can occur during the journey, but a joyous reunion is typical in the end. Examples of this would be The Princess Bride, would be Robin Hood, and Titanic. Now, I know that in my youth, I wasn't necessarily all about love stories. I would say in my adulthood, I definitely understand the kind of the compulsion, the kind of power that romance can have over individuals. A love story is something that is it's the process of two individuals from opposing clans, or from opposing clans, or just different clans, find themselves trying to build a friendship together, trying to build a relationship together, trying to build a future together. And that power, that attractive power between these two individuals can conquer anything. It can level mountains. It can save the world. Which, yeah, it has a lot of power. Don't get me wrong. Definitely has a lot of power. The things that individuals will do for love, they will do many things. They'll do many good things and many evil things. Love is a huge motivator for characters. In terms of a D&D setting or a D&D character, there have been characters that I have seen that have had maybe a love interest in the background, but I don't think I've ever experienced a character whose purpose was to pursue or free or avenge. Maybe not avenge. Avenge is pretty frequent, but to pursue or free their love, right? I don't think I've seen many cases where a player and a dungeon master have figured out, like, hey, my character is trying to fight for their love, and I want to make sure that that is their drive, that is their reason for being part of the party, because the main mission that they're on, the result of which is I'm going to be able to find my love finally and free them from their imprisonment, in which we talk about rescue again as a plot type. I've not really run into that really at all on D&D. I feel like that is a greatly underrated drive for a D&D character. I think it's probably because Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing tends to fall more on the side of action and more on the side of adventure than it does romance. I think in many of the games that I've played in or been a part of or have hosted, I feel like there's been a presence of love between NPCs, or love between an NPC and a player. I mean, potentially, but like there hasn't been a lot of investigation into love as a concept in the game, and I think one of the reasons is that for many parties it is a sensitive and awkward subject, because, like, sure, in a story not within Dungeons and Dragons, a group of adventurers that fight with each other, you might have a spark of passion between one character and another, right? In D&D, that doesn't really happen, because then the players would feel awkward around each other, unless those players knew each other in such a way where it wasn't awkward. But, like, yeah, love stories don't really come to the surface much in D&D, which is, I feel like there are ways to execute love stories that are not player v player centric. There are a lot of ways to incorporate love stories into tabletop stories. A lot of way to incorporate them into the driving motivator of a character. Now, from a macro sense, we're talking about these different settings. I don't think there's any obvious example of love, because all of the settings have some sort of conflict that's like competition and not necessarily love, right? So I feel like love is a much more subtle force. It is a much more personal force in individual characters' lives and individual NPCs' lives. But being that it is more subtle, is less bombastic, doesn't mean it should be ignored. And I do think that in that perspective, it's also incredibly underrated of an element to incorporate into a tabletop campaign in some way that is not uncomfortable. Anyways, we're gonna move forward. Boom, we're at plot 15. We are almost 3/4 of the way through. Now, we're going to talk about a very special kind of love. We're going to be talking about all sorts of special love. Forbidden love. It's a love story where the characters must break social rules in order to engage in the relationship and must be kept a secret. Maybe healthy love in a society that just discourages the healthy love. That will automatically incorporate a whole lot of love stories throughout history. The Romeo and Juliet, Roman Holiday, like that original movie. Yeah, a sense of just forces that don't want the love to take place for some reason. Just bullshit sources that don't need to exist in the first place, but because institutions and communities and families have preconceived notions of this, that, or the other thing, then they get in the they try to get in the way. But the biggest thing with the forbidden love is that we're talking about love here. Love vanquishes in the end. It can vanquish. Love can vanquish everything that tries to make it forbidden, and that's the biggest part of it, is that love rules all, regardless. That love is something that can end happily or can end at a tragedy. I don't really see this in tabletop a whole lot. I mean, usually if there's a love story and maybe the backdrop has like an opposing element of contrarianism for some reason, then that could fit into it. But I don't think that's really much the case. I would also say like Pocahontas, like that kind of story is a forbidden love. That's sort of colonialist, but I mean, technically, imagine if there wasn't such a power differential, but it was two opposing clans, right? Like in that case, it is definitely, that it's a forbidden love story. I don't know if I haven't seen any version of Pocahontas in tabletop. See, I am in uncharted territory, because once again, I don't see a lot of love stories in tabletop, and I do think there should be more love stories in tabletop. I'll be frank about that. All right, so we're going to move forward. Sacrifice. A sacrifice story is, I mean, you don't even need to call it the whole story. It's just an element in the story, right? It's a person driven to sacrifice themselves for a noble cause or to save someone else from harm. This may not be the intent at first, and thusly can create an unintentional hero. And of course, Avengers Endgame, the final Avengers movie, is definitely a tale of sacrifice. Fellowship of the Ring, if we're taking, I would say, probably out of all of the Lord of the Ring movies, Fellowship of the Ring, is, being that it is the one in the beginning, is one that has more of a sense of sacrifice. There's a quest, but this quest is a sacrifice upon Frodo. He's sort of, he's sacrificing the simple life that he would have in order to protect the world. And then, of course, we can't forget Boromir. We can't forget the sacrifice of Boromir after temptation takes hold, but breaks away from temptation in order to save Frodo and do his best to save his friends in the Fellowship. The Dark Knight Rises is a sacrifice tale, in a sense. Sacrifice is more of an element in a story than it is the entire point of a story. Usually, it's one of those things where a person reaches near the end of the story and they realize that they're forced to have a life or death choice, and they decide to go with the choice that services the most people, the choice that is the noble choice. and whatever, you know, that choice martyrs them. That choice maybe causes them to be forgotten forever. Regardless the case, the world is better off for that sacrifice. Debatably, depends upon your version of certain events. Tabletop, that's a tough one, because just like in a story, the person isn't gonna sacrifice themselves at the beginning of the story unless there's dire straits. I don't know if I've ever experienced a tabletop game where a character has flat out sacrificed themselves for the party. Like, just like taking really drastic moves that might get themselves killed, and they've convinced themselves that they're doing it for the party. That's all debatable. Like, I'm talking about a plain, just flat out, no frills sacrifice. I'm not talking about anything having to do necessarily with chance. I'm talking about a decision to end it for other people. And so, I've not run into many of that situation. I will say, and I will share this with you, I had a character playing in a Adventurers League game of Out of the Abyss, which is the published Dungeons and Dragons module. That was a very rough ride. And the thing is that there was a circumstance where a bunch of drow were pursuing the party who had just started embarking on rowboats, and they were being pummeled by arrows. There were a bunch of people that were super close to dying. And my DM at the time basically said that, hey, I'm gonna make sure that every few sessions somebody dies. Like, he was playing hard. He was playing really like hardcore, running really hardcore D&D. And so I didn't do it. Because somebody else died first. But I was gonna have my character, Rasha Dur, the Dragonborn Paladin, step out of the boat and start walking towards the shore. And I was going to willingly sacrifice my character to make sure that the other characters got away, so that all of the arrows would strike me. Basically, I was going to pull a Boromir. Aside from that, I don't think I've ever actually experienced a true, like, pivotal decision, sacrifice of self. Because usually in tabletop, people don't want to die. And they become very invested in their characters. And death is usually something that happens as a result of bad circumstances, as a result of chance, not a result of a concrete choice that I'm going to sacrifice myself. There may have been circumstances that have happened at one point or another. Okay, sweet. We are going to go to number 17. We are getting towards the end here, my friends. Plot type 17. Discovery. The truth finally dawns. It dawns in fire. The main character discovers something great or terrible and must make a difficult choice. The importance of the discovery might not be known at first, but is unveiled as the story progresses. I chose disaster movies for this one. Don't Look Up, Armageddon, or Frankenstein. General concept: a discovery. The inciting incident in a character story is the discovery, whatever it is that they discovered. But discovery is something that can happen later on in the story, going into the last act of the story, right? Very much like a noir where somebody unveils, like, oh, somebody puts the final puzzle piece together and sees the entire mystery. That's a moment of discovery. I also want to mention that discovery is one of those things that is pretty central to any Lovecraftian story. Because no matter what, the thing being discovered is terrible. On top of this, I would like to suggest that discovery can be scientific. It can be fate-based or religion-based, I guess. That discovery can be a revelation that, of truth within your family, something dastardly. It could be, really could be anything. If you're somebody who's a writer, or you're somebody who is a world builder, discovery is one of those things that you sort of plan for in advance. It's the premise of a story that, like, you have a specific time frame or beat that discovery will take place, and that you put the seeds of each puzzle piece, very much like the riddle. You place the puzzle pieces accordingly. If you're somebody running a tabletop game and discovery is an element in there, I would say that as a DM, please do not do the homework later. Do the homework sooner than later, because that's going to inform how you approach the campaign. Like, you want that discovery to be finalizing, right? You want that discovery to be profound. If it's about a character, well, then the character and the DM need to talk to each other, and the DM needs to, the character needs to basically set the elements and be like, okay, well, these are the things that my character is going to try to accomplish. These are the things that my character is going to try to discover. And then the dungeon master would be like, okay, would it be all right if I'm the one that determines what the discovery is? Like, what is it you find out? Having that dialogue is extremely important. I had a character. My goodness, I can't remember that character's name. He was a monk. A monk who basically knew the location of an ancient temple. And in that ancient temple, there was a secret of which nobody in the entire world knew about, but it was a devastating secret. The only thing that my monk character and the hermitage that he was a part of, all they knew was the location and how to get into it. Nobody was allowed to actually go into it. It was useful resources for the DM to make something of it, but I guess in that case, when I was playing that character, the DM really only used it as didn't really use it as a thing for my character to eventually work towards discovering. It was basically just like a thing to troll my character about, or a thing to make a dramatic twist with no actual pretense beforehand. I would say if you want to run anything in terms of discovery, please have it planned in advance. Please do not wing it. Discovery is not something to just muck around with. In a macro sense, from the connected settings of D&D, I think it would be with Project Aurora, I think that's also something where once a setting is chosen, I think the DMs and the lore masters need to have a concrete discussion about what the overall conflict and plot is going to look like if people are going to be working cohesively, and is there some sort of drastic discovery, and they need to define it from the beginning and draw the ladder to that discovery. It's something that should not be winged ever. All right, plot type 18, wretched excess. We're almost done here, so we'll be wrapping it up. The main character goes beyond the normal accepted behavior as the world looks on. It may be horrifying, or a revelation of how thin the line is between heaven and hell. Examples of this would be Requiem for a Dream, Scarface, and Clockwork Orange. Yes, wretched excess is definitely going to be the kind of story or the kind of element where somebody begins from a stasis of normalcy. And not only do they leave that stasis, they take it to the extreme. It's all about expressions of extreme excess. So you were talking about drugs. You're talking about, the temptation of crime. You're talking about the excess of one of the deadly sins, the excess of greed, the excess of lust. And I mean, you could have wretched excess movies that are that have kind of a more positive tone. I guess you could, with a bit of a roll of the eyes. Any movie about the stock market, any movie about big business and like any of the arms dealer kind of movies like Lord of War, that has an element of wretched excess in it, and it's greed. It's greed. And it tries to justify the wretched excess, and that's the funny part. Is usually when you watch one of those movies, it's sort of like a feel good, like this is, you enjoy the person doing these things, but they're not a good person. Let's just be flat out plain that they're not a good person. You're sympathetic to the person participating in excess. Now, of course, there is addiction. Addiction is a different thing. Addiction is whether you're somebody who says addiction is a choice or addiction is a disease. Doesn't matter. Addiction is something that is a force of temptation. It is a force that pulls an individual into their state of excess. Now, in terms of, I'm gonna put 2 minutes on the clock this time. In terms of wretched excess in tabletop, usually wretched excess comes in the form of D&D parties that go complete murder hobo. That is wretched excess. And the thing is that I feel like that's never approached correctly. The thing is that if you end up running a game where there is excess taking place, you know that a lot of times it's not the characters playing the game at that point, it's the players. The players just want to go hog wild. And you as the DM are either you're chuckling it up or you're getting angry because that's, you know, you don't want them to play that way, or they're completely going to screw themselves over as players. The thing about Wretched Excess is that the dungeon master should have consequences and story points ready for that. That there should be the result of that excess. What it does to the body, what it does to people around them, what it does to society and what society thinks of them. I mean, this also comes in the form of, you know, like Munchkin players in D&D taking up all the golden items and stuff. There's got to be consequence for that, and you can make story consequences for it. You can have individuals that approach either trying to apprehend the players, or individuals that approach that sort of see the players getting into doing the things and getting into the things that they're doing, and sort of like recognizing them for very specific acts and drawing them further into that world. I will say, if any character I have, let's say if they're chaotic good, if they go on a wanton path of death and destruction in circumstances where they could have practiced the good side, that's my opportunity to basically talk with them and force them to change their alignment. Or it might be more of a thing where you have a character approach who really wants that. You have an NPC approach who wants that character to do more of this destructive thing, more of this wanton violence. There's a specific need for it in the market of the underground. But then, of course, very overtly make it clear that the NPC does not want them to do good things and wants them to do evil things, and make it a point in the conversation where it's like, you may not realize it, but you're in the game now. You've killed all of these people. You're recognized as a killer. Regardless of how you think of yourself, you're a killer. So, killer, you want to make some gold? Here's my card. And that would be another very interesting way to get a character into another alignment from their base alignment if they indulge into excess. All right, we got two more, so let's dive right into it. Plot type 19. The last two plot types, I might consolidate them. We're gonna make these pretty quick, actually. So I'm gonna do 3 minutes on each. There's ascension and descension. Transformations. These are coming of age transformations, where the main character, they begin in the gutter as a sinner or a wreck of some kind. The story reveals their ascension to become a better person, often in response to strain that would defeat a normal person. Thus, they achieve heroic status. Examples for this would be Hancock, Megamind, The Grinch, and A Christmas Carol. All of these have characters that begin as morally negative individuals, but then become fortunate, morally positive individuals by the end. Maybe not even morally negative. not morally negative, just lost, aloft, without any clear compass on what they're doing, right? Or maybe they do have a very particular purpose and they think that that's their purpose, but they realize their purpose is for good. It's for something grander. This is a redemption arc. Pure and simple. It's a redemption arc. I would like to think that there are so many opportunities for there to be characters in a story or a game to find themselves in a position where they are at their lowest point to begin with. And their journey is to become a valiant individual. And that it's not simply how the player feels about the character or how the writer feels about the character, but that there's some understanding in advance that that's the direction they want to go as a character, that is the direction. Maybe there is this sense of they want to be a better person, but weren't able to because they were toying with their vices, or maybe they didn't ever know that that's what they wanted to be. And so somebody believed in them. Somebody convinced them that they could. In the tabletop setting, like the ascension and descension, in so many cases, it ends up becoming incidental. It's a result of like characters playing in the plot. And then it's how the player reckons their character has changed. I think that's not really all well planned out. And as somebody that has been running D&D for a while and somebody that has been playing D&D for a while, I think it would be a lot better to have a sense of this is where I want the character to be by the end, and to tell my dungeon master, hey, you are in control of the world, and what happens to my character is dependent upon, what sort of challenges that character comes across. However, I would plead for your invisible hand, because my goal, the story arc that I want to see with this character, that I want to play with this character, is from their worst to their best. And to have that conversation with a dungeon master who's masterful enough to pull that off with you, I think that is something that needs to enter more conversations with players and DMs. Rise into the light. I would say, from a macro sense, once again, if we're talking Clockwork Skies, imagine this floating city is in its absolute worst position right now. It is low on food. It is low on resources. It is about to crash into the planet. It just requires the initiative of particular individuals in order to ensure that this that the city has a beacon of hope. And it's a story about hope. It's a story about redemption. And I think these are some very powerful tropes. They're very powerful themes. However, for the very last plot type that I would like to talk about, descension. Sometimes you go from up to down. Sometimes you are Harvey Dent. It's the opposite of ascension. It's a person of high standing descending into the gutter and into darkness. Perhaps sympathetically, as they are unable to handle the strain and instead give into their baser vices. There are a lot of examples to this. The Shining is one. Anything that's a descent into madness. This is a dissension story. Color Out of Space. That is a recent movie. It was actually really good. But previous H.P. Lovecraft short story from many, many decades ago, Color Out of Space, which is a descent into madness. Return of the Sith, particularly that movie in Star Wars, Anakin finally taking his final throws into the world of Darth Vader. Revenge of the Sith, not Return of the Sith. Revenge of the Sith. In the end, somebody of a moral high ground loses all of that moral high ground and is plunged into the gutter. Harvey Dent is, Harvey Dent from the Batman lore. Arthas from Warcraft lore. Anybody that starts out pure and becomes debased by the end. Most leaders, it goes with the sense you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Most world leaders, if they stay in power for too long, they usually descend, and that is why we don't have leaders for that long, or we try not to. Dissension is any villain story, really, like any villain prologue, any villain backstory. Dissension can be a very dark thing and can include very dark themes, very taboo themes. If you're talking about character progression, that's another conversation to have with your DM. But also, I would like to mention for the fact that I'm not a huge fan of brutalist DMs that like to pull their characters down into the darkness regardless of what the characters want. I don't enjoy that DMing style. I've been DM'd that style for a long time, and I'm not a fan of it. I would like to say that within the full competency of players and the DM, in the same fashion as coordinating an ascension story, coordinating a descension story is equally important. Now, I think a descension story from a macro sense would be really interesting if, say, an important NPC to the players, a critical important NPC to the players, the greatest ally of the players, a person that the players loved, had taken a turn for the worst and became the main villain. I think that would be a fantastic story arc. From a macro sense, I definitely can see something like that happening in Clockwork Skies. I feel like Mama Fights Back, if you have, two competing mining companies trying to take over this land in the West, then like the mining companies will, through propaganda, they're going to seem like good types. That's a little different. Deceit through propaganda and then revealing how bad they are, that's more of a revelation. That's more of a discovery than it is a dissension. A dissension is an earnest falling into the gutter. So, and of course, the on your mark setting, which is dragon racing, there is no like macro conflict to speak of. So there's nothing really to add there, to my knowledge. Besides, I am a huge fan between these settings. I'm a huge fan of Clockwork Skies. And I think there's a lot that can be done there. Okay. These were the 20 plot types, my friends. 2-0. Now, these plot types were initially were initially developed, that is to say, incited by Ronald Tobias. He had a book called 20 Master Plots that was published in 1993. How to build them, describes them, and how to build complete stories out of them. This presentation is a review of each of the plots presented in this book, adapted with examples in film. So I sincerely hope you appreciated this presentation. I am going to, and we're just in time here. It is 10 p.m. Eastern. So with that said, I'm going to begin spinning down the gears, and we'll begin wrapping up this stream. And next stream will be a lot more interactive, a lot more discussion between myself and chat in constructing worlds, in developing the plot or the elements of a particular subject, like I usually do. But I had a particular place in my schedule to do something like this, so I sincerely appreciate you tuning in and checking it out. Final advert. Oh, I have a website, so go to chaoticandwriter.com. I do post articles on this site. I'm very proud of the work that I have done there. There's still plenty of work to come. I will say this. There is more than just that, though. I do also have a Patreon. The purpose of the Patreon is to support the overhead costs of things like the website, of the stream, of certain services that I use in order to provide content to the stream, Dungeons and Dragons related content, world building related content, the potential of doing other content in other mediums. If you enjoyed this, and if you want to see more and want to see where else this endeavor goes, please consider going down to the doobly-doo, selecting the Patreon link, and consider signing up. Your patronage is appreciated, and there are some benefits. So please go check out those benefits, and I will see you on the other side with my special thanks. That is going to be it for this evening, and I'm going to make sure that the content that I have completed tonight gets edited and published up on the YouTube, so that you awesome people on Patreon can have access to that as behind the scenes rewatchable footage. So I want to thank everybody again. I'm going to wind down for the night. It has been a pleasure and a privilege. And I, Chaotic and Writer, will see y'all in the next episode with another world building stream. Next stream being one that is highly interactive, highly conversational. So have a fantastic evening.